The sky above Stygian 7 had not seen true light in 3,000 years. Where once this world had orbited a yellow star in the segmentum obscurus, now it tumbled through a wounded pocket of space-time, half anchored to the material realm, half dissolved into the roiling madness of the warp. The planet's surface was a nightmare landscape, where physics held no dominion mountains of bleeding stone rivers that flowed upward into crimson clouds. Forests of screaming iron that grew from battlefields, where the dead refused to truly die. The Imperium of man had abandoned Stygian 7 during the Age of Apostasy, when chaos cultists had successfully completed a ritual of such profane magnitude that reality itself had rejected the world. For millennia, it had been marked in navigational charts with the sigil of damnation na ultra, go no further. Those few vessels that strayed too close reported visions of impossible geometries. Crew members driven to madness by whispers that leaked through the ship's Geller fields, hull integrity failures that defied all mechanical explanation. Yet the Imperium's war is eternal, and even the damned must be reclaimed when strategic necessity demands it. The Indomitus Crusade had reached this forsaken sector in early M42, and with it came the 47th Cadian Shock Troops, 3 companies of the Ultramarines. Chapter: a contingent of Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests, and most crucially, an inquisitorial task force, led by Inquisitor Lucan Varus of the Ordo Malleus. Their mission was grimly simple: establish a beachhead on Stygian 7, locate the focal point of the planet's corruption, and either purge or collapse it entirely, denying the archenemy a staging ground for further incursions into Imperial space. It was a mission doomed from its inception. The first 3 landing zones had been consumed within hours, not by enemy action, but by the planet itself. Reality did not function properly here. Guardsmen fired laser guns that melted in their hands. Their energy cells transmuted into seething black ichor. Drop pods plunged through solid rock only to emerge in the middle of boiling lakes that had not existed moments before. Vox communications became choirs of screaming voices speaking in tongues no human throat could produce. By the 3rd solar day, the Imperial forces had retreated to a single fortified position. The ruins of what Mechanicus Archaeotech indicated had once been an Imperial cathedral, now little more than a ring of shattered rockcrete walls and toppled Aquila statues, whose stone eyes still wept blood. Here the warp's influence was marginally weaker. Some ancient blessings still clung to the consecrated ground, enough to provide a fragile sanctuary. It was from this position that Inquisitor Lucan Varus witnessed the arrival. The warp storm that preceded him was unlike any recorded in Imperial archives. Standard warp phenomena carried the signatures of the ruinous powers. The brass thunder of Korn's rage, the pestilent miasma of Nurgle's entropy, the impossible geometries of Tzeentch's schemes, the sensuous agony of Slaanesch's excess. But this disturbance was different. It tasted of something older, something from beyond the familiar nightmare of the Imperium. Inquisitor Lucan Varus stood atop the cathedral's broken spire, his psychic hood crackling with protective wards as he gazed through augur-blessed magnoculars at the phenomenon manifesting 3 kilometers to the northeast. His retinue surrounded him, a null maiden whose psychic emptiness provided a zone of calm. 3 battle sisters of the Order of the Valorous Heart, with bolters trained on the disturbance, and tech priest Dominus Fum 7, whose mechadendrites writhed in agitation as his sensors screamed contradictory data. Magos, Varus said, his voice steady, despite the unease crawling up his spine. Report. Fum 7's Vox speaker crackled with static before resolving into the flat intonation of the cult Mechanicus. Energy readings. inconsistent with standard warp breach Inquisitor. The disturbance exhibits characteristics of dimensional translocation, but the mathematical constants are wrong. As if the equations describing our reality have been forcibly overwritten by foreign parameters. Speak plainly, Magos. Something from outside is pushing through. Not from the warp, from somewhere else entirely. The sky split. It did not tear like parchment, nor did it bleed like flesh. Instead, reality fractured a wound in the shape of a massive cross edged in crimson light that cast no shadows, dripping with what appeared to be blood, but evaporated before it touched the ground. The air around the breach shimmered with visual distortions, and even from 3 kilometers away, every soul in the Imperial encampment felt it a pressure against the base of their skulls. A sensation of being watched by something that existed in the margins between dimensions. Then the screaming began. Not from the Imperial forces from the planet itself. The demon winds that perpetually howled across Stygian 7's surface suddenly fell silent, as if in fear. The bleeding mountains stopped weeping. The forests of screaming iron went quiet. For the first time in 3 millennia, Daemon World Stygian 7 held its breath. Through the cross-shaped wound in reality, a single figure fell. He was humanoid, roughly 2 meters tall, broad-shouldered, clad in battered black armor that bore no resemblance to any Imperial or Chaos pattern. In his right hand, he gripped a sword so massive that its very existence defied logic, easily 2 meters of pitted, scarred metal wide as a grown man's torso, with an edge that had been chipped and sharpened countless times. The weapon was less a blade and more a slab of iron, shaped by violence into purpose. But it was not the sword that drew the eye. It was the brand. On his neck, visible even at this distance through magnification, was a mark burned into flesh. A symbol that should not exist in this reality, yet here it was bleeding freshly, as if the wound had never healed. And around that mark, reality itself seemed to recoil. The warp energies that saturated every molecule of Stygian 7's atmosphere twisted away from the falling figure, creating a sphere of almost normal space that moved with him as he plummeted toward the demon-corrupted earth below. The figure struck the ground 3 kilometers from the Imperial position with an impact that registered on seismic sensors. A crater bloomed in the bleeding earth, sending up plumes of ash and corrupted soil. For a long moment, nothing moved. The unnatural silence persisted. Then he stood. The figure rose from the crater slowly, deliberately, the massive sword gripped in one hand, as if it weighed nothing. Even from this distance, even through layers of psychic protection and augmented vision, Inquisitor Eisenhornus felt the man's presence like a physical weight. This was not a psyker's power, nor a demon's corruption, nor the blessed aura of the Emperor's faithful. This was something else, something that existed in defiance of the rules that governed both the material realm and the immaterium. "Throne of Terra," whispered Sister Superior, Amelie her bolter suddenly feeling inadequate in her armored hands. "What is that?" Tech Priest Fum 7's mechadendrites writhed faster, his Vox speaker crackling with static. "Readings are impossible. The entity registers simultaneously as human baseline, yet chronometric analysis suggests biological age, inconsistent with observed physical trauma. Warp signature is negative, yet the entity exists within a localized reality bubble that repels Imperium influence. This defies all known magos." Varus's voice cut through the tech priest's mounting panic with practiced authority. "Simplified assessment. Is it a threat?" A pause. Then, "Unknown Inquisitor. Insufficient data. Recommend extreme caution." The Inquisitor raised his hand, and the Battle Sisters immediately took firing positions. The Null Maiden, whose operational designation was simply Silence. After the Sisters of Silence had severed her connection to the warp in childhood, moved closer, her mere presence dampening the psychic pressure that leaked from the breach in the sky. But before Varus could issue further orders, the situation evolved. The demons came. They materialized from the bleeding earth and the crimson sky drawn by the cross-shaped wound that still hung in the air above the crater. Lesser demons, at first imps and plague-bearers and bloodletters, their forms barely cohesive in the half-real nature of Stygian VII's existence. They shrieked and gibbered as they charged toward the figure in the crater. Claws and rusted blades raised, driven by an instinct older than thought, destroy the intruder, feast upon the anomaly, drag the outsider into the warp's eternal hunger. The figure in black armor did not run, did not call for aid, did not even turn to face the demon horde fully. He simply raised his sword. What happened next would be reported in 17 different ways by 17 different witnesses, each account contradicting the others in specific details, yet agreeing on the fundamental impossibility of what they had seen. Sister Superior Amelie would later testify that the sword seemed to grow darker, as if absorbing light itself. Tech Priest Foom 7's recordings showed spatial distortions around the blade's edge, reality bending in ways that violated thermodynamic constants. The Null Maiden, who experienced the world through absence rather than presence, would gesture in her sign language that she had felt nothing where something should have been. But all agreed on this when the figure swung his sword. Diamonds died. Not banished, not disrupted, not sent howling back into the warp to reform and return. They died. Their immaterial essences shattered like glass, their connection to the ruinous powers severed not through holy rites or psychic might, but through pure, brutal, physical violence. The massive blade carved through demonic flesh as if it were cutting smoke, yet each strike left permanent endings in its wake. Where the sword passed, the warp itself recoiled, and demons simply ceased to be. The first wave of lesser demons died in seconds. 17 entities reduced to fading wisps of corrupted energy that dispersed without even leaving ash behind. The figure continued forward, his pace unhurried, the sword held in one hand, as casually as another man might carry a walking stick. Then the greater demon arrived. It tore through the skin of reality, with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, a hulking mass of brass and sinew and burning blood. A bloodthirster of Khorne, lesser only in comparison to the mightiest of the blood god's champions. But still a creature that could rend a land raider to scrap metal with its bare hands. Its axe burned with the fury of an eternally raging sun. And when it roared, the sound carried across kilometers to rattle the bones of every living thing that heard it. The Imperial forces in the cathedral ruins watched in transfixed horror as the demon charged, its hoofed feet cracking the tortured earth with each thunderous step. Any sane being would have fled. Any warrior with sense would have called for support, for blessed weapons, for sanctified ammunition and holy litanies to bolster the soul against corruption. The figure in black armor did neither. He met the bloodthirsters' charge head-on. The clash of their weapons sent a shockwave rippling outward that extinguished fires and shattered stone. The daemon's axe, wreathed in Khorne's endless wrath, met the massive iron sword in a shower of sparks that burned like dying stars. For a moment they stood locked in contest, demon might against human will. Then the figure moved. His technique was not graceful. There was no artistry in it, no flowing forms practiced in training halls or blessed by ancient traditions. His movements were brutal, efficient, born from countless battles where hesitation meant death and mercy was a luxury that got you killed. He fought like a man who had been fighting his entire life, who knew violence so intimately that it had become a second language, who understood that survival meant never stopping, never slowing, never giving the enemy even a heartbeat to recover. The sword blurred through a horizontal arc that should have been too slow, too telegraphed, yet somehow caught the bloodthirster's neck in that perfect moment when the demon's own momentum carried it forward into the blade's path. Brass armor parted. Demonic flesh split. And the bloodthirster's head, still roaring its death curse, separated from its massive shoulders and tumbled to the corrupted earth. The body followed a moment later, crashing down with enough force to create a second crater. Unlike lesser demons, the bloodthirster did not immediately disperse. Its essence was too powerful, too deeply anchored to Khorne's realm, and for several seconds it thrashed and screamed as the warp tried to pull it back for eventual reformation. The figure in black armor raised his left arm, and only then did observers notice that it was not flesh and bone, but a mechanical construct of unfamiliar design. Something built into the prosthetic made a deep, resonant sound, a mechanical cycling that ended in a thunderous roar. A projectile explosion struck the bloodthirster's dying form dead center. Not a las bolt, not a bolter round, but something that created a blast radius that charred the earth black and sent demon ikers spraying in all directions. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained of the greater demon but fading embers that winked out one by one, like stars dying at the end of time. Silence fell across the battlefield. Even the perpetual howling of Stygian Seven's demon winds had stilled, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. The figure stood in the center of carnage, the massive sword held loosely at his side, his black cape settling around his shoulders. For a long moment, he simply stood there, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned his gaze toward the distant cathedral ruins, toward the Imperial forces who had witnessed everything. Inquisitor Lutsen Varus felt the weight of that gaze, even across 3 kilometers of distance. Those eyes, visible now through the magnification of his auger lenses, were not the eyes of a man touched by chaos, nor blessed by the Emperor, nor driven mad by the horrors of the galaxy. They were the eyes of someone who had seen things that would shatter lesser minds, yet continued forward anyway. Eyes that had looked into the abyss so many times that the abyss had learned to look away first. "Vox Officer Varus said quietly, his voice remarkably steady, given what he had just witnessed. "Broadcast on all Imperial channels. Priority Alpha. Unknown entity has manifested on Stygian 7. Entity has engaged and destroyed Chaos forces. Intent unknown. Requesting immediate guidance from Ordo Malleus Command." He paused, then added words that would later appear in 17 different reports, each one noting that the Inquisitor's voice had carried an undertone that veteran officers recognized as carefully suppressed fear. "And send a second message. If this entity proves hostile, we are going to need significantly more firepower." In the crater, the figure began walking toward the Imperial position. His pace was unhurried, almost leisurely, the massive sword leaving a furrow in the earth where its point dragged behind him. With each step, the sphere of repelled warp energy moved with him, a bubble of almost normality in a world where reality itself had surrendered to madness. Behind him, the cross-shaped wound in the sky began to close, sealing shut, with a sound like tearing fabric played in reverse. As it disappeared, it left behind only a faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze and a single drop of blood that evaporated before reaching the ground. The man who had come to be known as the Struggler had arrived in the 41st millennium. And whether he knew it or not, his war was about to begin anew. The walk took 17 minutes. 17 minutes in which the figure in black armor crossed 3 kilometers of demon-corrupted earth with the deliberate pace of a man who had nowhere else to be. His sword, that impossibly massive slab of iron, dragged behind him, carving a shallow furrow through soil that bled when disturbed. The sphere of repelled warp energy moved with him, a bubble of almost normality, in a world where physics had become a cruel joke told by mad gods. In the Imperial fortification, 17 minutes felt like an eternity. Inquisitor Lucien Varus stood at the forward observation post, his auger lenses tracking every step of the approaching figure. Around him, the cathedral ruins had transformed into a hive of desperate activity. Guardsmen from the 47th Cadian shock troops manned firing positions behind hastily reinforced barricades, their lace guns charged and aimed at the lone figure. Battle Sisters of the Order of the Valorous Heart had taken positions at strategic choke points, their bolters blessed with litanies of protection and loaded with sanctified ammunition. Tech Priest FUM-7 had deployed a network of servo skulls equipped with Auspex scanners, attempting to gather more data on the approaching entity. Pattern analysis complete, Inquisitor. FUM-7's Vox speaker crackled. Entity exhibits no standard warp signature. Biological readings indicate human baseline, yet chronometric dating suggests tissue trauma accumulated over decades of sustained combat. The armor bears no resemblance to any known STC pattern. The weapon? The tech priest paused, his mechadendrites writhing in what might have been confusion or awe. The weapon should not be possible. The metallurgical mass suggests weight in excess of 150 kilograms, yet the entity wields it single-handed with apparent ease. Could he be Astartes? Asked Commissar Thane, the senior officer of the Cadian contingent. The man's scarred face betrayed no fear, but his hand rested on his bolt pistol. Some lost chapter, perhaps, or a renegade who has fought against chaos so long he's forgotten his own origins. Varus shook his head slowly. Space Marines don't bleed like that. Look at the brand on his neck. It's been bleeding continuously since his arrival, yet he shows no signs of weakening. And the way the warp recoils from him, that's not gene-forged resistance. That's something else entirely. Sister Superior Amelie joined them at the observation post, her armor still scorched from the earlier demon attack that had claimed 3 of her sisters. Inquisitor, I must voice my concern. We are preparing to allow an unknown entity, one that arrived through a warp breach, to approach our position without resistance. This violates every protocol of the Ordo Malleus. I am aware, Sister Superior. Varus lowered the auger lenses, his aging face creased with the weight of decisions made in the name of an empire that valued purity above all else. But consider what we have witnessed. That entity killed 17 lesser demons and a bloodthirster, alone, without sanctified weapons, without holy litanies, without even appearing to struggle. If he intended to harm us, we would already be dead. Then what does he want? That, Varus said quietly, is what I intend to discover. The figure stopped at the outer perimeter, some 50 meters from the first line of barricades. Up close, through the enhanced magnification of military-grade optics, the Imperial forces could finally see him properly. He was younger than expected, perhaps in his 3rd decade if chronological age held any meaning for whatever he was. His face was angular, scarred, with eyes that carried the hollow look of someone who had witnessed horrors that would break ordinary minds. The armor he wore was black leather and metal practical, rather than ceremonial, marked by countless repairs, and bearing no insignia or marks of allegiance. But it was the sword that commanded attention. Nearly 2 meters of pitted notched iron, its edge a jagged line of violence, rather than the smooth perfection of proper bladesmithing. Every inch of that weapon spoke of use of endless battles, of a tool forged not in a workshop, but in the crucible of war itself. The blade was dark, not with paint or coating, but with something that seemed to absorb light, as if the sword had drunk so deeply from death that it had become a fragment of death itself. And the brand. The bleeding cross burned into his neck, weeping fresh crimson that evaporated before it could stain his collar. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind." Varus called out, his voice amplified by the Vox speakers mounted on the cathedral's remaining walls. "Identify yourself. State your purpose and origin." The figure's head tilted slightly, as if considering the question. When he spoke, his voice was rough, unused to speaking, carrying an accent that matched no known dialect in the Imperium's records. "I don't explain myself to anyone." The words hung in the air with quiet defiance. Commissar Thane's hand moved toward his bolt pistol. Sister Superior Amelie shifted her stance, ready to act. Tech Priest Fum Seven's mechadendrites coiled defensively. But Inquisitor Varus raised his hand, forestalling any hostile action. "Then what do you want? Why did you come here?" The figure's gaze swept across the Imperial fortification, taking in the desperate defenders, the makeshift barricades, the wounded being tended to in the cathedral's nave. When his eyes returned to Varus, there was something in them that the Inquisitor recognized despite all his years of hunting heretics and questioning suspects. Exhaustion, not physical weariness, but the soul-deep fatigue of someone who had been fighting for so long that fighting had become the only thing left. "I heard the demons," the figure said simply. "I killed demons. That's all there is to it." Before anyone could respond, the ground began to tremble. It started as a vibration felt more than heard that set teeth on edge and caused the remaining stained glass in the cathedral windows to crack further. Then the trembling intensified, becoming a steady rhythm that had nothing to do with seismic activity and everything to do with something massive approaching from the north. The demon winds of Stygian VII, which had been silent since the figure's arrival, suddenly resumed their howling. But this time, the screams carried a note of anticipation rather than eternal torment. "Auspex readings?" Varus snapped. Tech Priest Fum Seven's augmetics whirred as he processed the incoming data. "Multiple contacts, Inquisitor. Large biomass readings. Warp signatures consistent with Throne of Terra. Consistent with possessed Marines. Squad strength approaching from the northern ruins. Estimated arrival 90 seconds. The figure in black armor didn't wait for permission or orders. He simply turned to face the new threat, that massive sword rising from its resting position to a ready stance. The movement was smooth, practiced the motion of someone who had held that weapon so long. It had become an extension of his body. "Stand ready," Varus commanded. "All units prepare to engage. Sister Superior, deploy your squad to support." "No." The figure's voice cut through the tactical planning with flat certainty. "You'll just get in the way. Stay back and watch." The absolute confidence in those words was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. The possessed Marines emerged from the northern ruins like a nightmare given form. 8 of them, once proud Astartes, whose flesh had been corrupted and reshaped by demonic possession. Their power armor had fused with their mutated bodies, ceramite plates melding with chitinous growths and scaled hide. Claws the size of combat knives extended from hands that had once wielded bolters in the Emperor's name. Mouths full of razor teeth, split faces where proud helms had once rested. They moved with the terrifying speed of space marines, combined with the unnatural fluidity of demon kind, covering the distance between the ruins and the Imperial position in seconds. Their howls were multi-layered, the voices of men and the screams of warp entities combining into a sound that caused two guardsmen to drop their laser guns and clutch their ears in agony. The figure in black armor walked forward to meet them. Not charged, not rushed. Walked with the same deliberate pace he had maintained since his arrival. His stride was steady, economical, wasting no energy on display or intimidation. He simply moved forward, and with each step, something in the air changed. The pressure increased. The temperature dropped. The very ground seemed to harden beneath his feet, as if reality itself was reinforcing its laws in his presence. The first possessed Marine reached him, massive claws extended for a killing strike that would have torn an unaugmented human in half. The figure's sword moved. It was not a fast swing. Anyone watching could track its path clearly. But there was something in the geometry of it, in the angle and timing, that made it inevitable. The massive blade intersected with the possessed Marine's downward slash at the precise moment when the creature's momentum had committed it fully to the attack, when it could neither dodge nor redirect. The sword, impossibly heavy, yet wielded with practiced ease, cleaved through mutated flesh and fused ceramite with the sound of tearing metal. The possessed Marine's upper body separated from its lower half in a spray of corrupted blood and ichorous fluids. The demon inhabiting the corpse tried to maintain its hold on reality, but something about the sword's passage severed not just flesh, but the connection between the material and immaterial. The demon screamed once, a sound of genuine surprise, and then dissipated like smoke in a hurricane. The figure didn't pause to confirm the kill. He was already moving that massive sword, flowing into the next strike with brutal efficiency. The remaining possessed Marines, driven by instincts refined over 10,000 years of warfare, attempted to surround him. They spread out, attacking from multiple angles, simultaneously, claws and mutated appendages lashing out in a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed any ordinary opponent. But the figure wasn't ordinary. He fought like violence distilled to its purest essence. There was no wasted motion, no flourishes, no techniques taught in training halls or sanctified by tradition. Every movement served a purpose. Every shift of weight created an opening or closed one. Every strike of that massive blade ended a threat permanently. He turned demon flesh into carrion with the methodical efficiency of a butcher. At work, his blade finding gaps in mutated anatomy that shouldn't have existed, striking with force that shouldn't have been possible from a human frame. A possessed Marine lunged from his left jaws, distended impossibly wide. The figure's mechanical left arm came up, and from within the prosthetic came that deep, resonant sound the Imperial observers had heard before. A cannon built into the artificial limb fired point-blank, the projectile explosion destroying the Marine's head and upper torso in a blast of fire and force. Another Marine came from the right, claws gleaming with warp taint. The figure pivoted, letting the claws pass a hand's breadth from his face, and brought his sword around in a diagonal slash that carved through the Marine's midsection. As the bisected corpse fell, he was already engaging the next target. The combat lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, 8 corpses lay scattered across the demon-corrupted earth, their mutated forms rapidly decomposing now that the demons inhabiting them had been forcibly severed from their anchors in reality. The figure stood among them, his breathing slightly elevated, but otherwise appearing unmarked by the engagement. His sword, that massive instrument of death, rested point down in the corrupted soil, and he leaned on it slightly, as if catching his breath. In the Imperial fortifications, silence reigned. Commissar Thane finally found his voice. "Holy Throne, what is he, Sister Superior?" Amelie made the sign of the Aquila with shaking hands. "I have seen Space Marine champions duel possessed brethren. I have witnessed the Grey Knights banish greater demons. But that... She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Tech Priest Fum7's Vox speaker crackled with static, his cognitive processors overwhelmed by attempting to reconcile what his sensors had recorded with known parameters of human capability. Anomalous. Impossible. The force ratios, the velocity calculations, the durability measurements, none of it adheres to established biological constants. Inquisitor Varus watched the figure straighten, pulling his sword from the earth and turning back toward the Imperial position. Those eyes, hollow and ancient, despite the young face that contained them, fixed on the Inquisitor once more. "Still want me to explain myself?" the figure called out. Varus found himself smiling despite the dire situation, despite the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, despite every protocol screaming that this entity represented an unknown and therefore lethal threat. Because in that moment, he understood something fundamental about the man standing before him. This was not a demon, not a chaos agent, not some warp-spawned abomination wearing human flesh. This was a warrior who had simply been fighting for so long that he had forgotten how to be anything else. "No," Varus called back. "But I think we should talk, and I believe we can help each other." The figure considered this for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he began walking toward the Imperial fortifications once more. This time, no weapons were raised to stop him. This time, when he reached the forward barricades, guardsmen stepped aside to let him pass. Sister Superior Amelie moved to intercept, but Varus raised his hand. "Let him through, sister. I don't think we have anything to fear from him." "How can you be certain, Inquisitor?" Varus gestured toward the destroyed possessed Marines. "Because if he wanted us dead, sister, we would already be so. And because..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Because I have spent 40 years hunting heretics, cultists, and traitors. I know what chaos looks like when it wears human skin. And that man, whatever else he might be, is not touched by the ruinous powers." The figure reached the inner courtyard of the cathedral ruins. Up close, without the distance and magnification, he seemed somehow more human and less human simultaneously. The scars on his face told stories of battles that should have killed him. The mechanical arm was clearly ancient, its construction predating any STC pattern in Imperial records. The sword resting across his shoulders now was a monument to pragmatic violence. And the brand. The brand on his neck continued to weep blood that evaporated before it could fall, a wound that would never heal, a mark that bound him to something beyond the comprehension of even inquisitorial scholarship. "I am Inquisitor Lucin Varus of the Ordo Malleus," Varus said formally, making the sign of the Aquila. "These are my subordinates, Commissar Thane of the 47th Cadian Shock Troops, Sister Superior, Amelie of the Order of the Valorous Heart, and Tech Priest Dominus Fum7 of the Adeptus Mechanicus. We serve the God Emperor of mankind in his eternal war against the forces of chaos." The figure's expression didn't change. "Don't care about your Emperor. Don't care about your war." He gestured with his sword toward the northern ruins, where more growths and screams were beginning to echo. "But I can tell you're fighting demons. And I've been killing demons for longer than I can remember. So if there are more of them here, point me in their direction." Varus felt Commissar Thane tense beside him, heard Sister Superior Amelie's intake of breath at this casual dismissal of the God Emperor. But he also saw something in the figure's eyes that made him raise his hand once more, forestalling any zealous response. "Before we discuss further cooperation," Varus said carefully, "I must ask, what should we call you?" The figure was silent for so long that Varus began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the name itself was a burden he had carried across more battlefields than could be counted. Guts. They call me Guts. The name hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Inquisitor Varus committed it to memory, knowing that this moment, this meeting between the Imperium of man and the man who had fallen from nowhere to fight demons, for no reason beyond the fact that demons existed, would echo through the decades to come. Very well, Guts. Welcome to Stygian 7. Varus gestured toward the cathedral's interior, where medici were tending to the wounded, and tech priests were attempting to re-establish communication with the orbital forces. We have much to discuss. But first, I think you should know what you've walked into. Guts followed the Inquisitor into the ruins, his massive sword still resting across his shoulders, his steps leaving faint impressions in the corrupted earth. Behind them, the guardsmen slowly lowered their weapons, uncertainty and relief warring on their faces. They had been preparing for death. Instead, they had gained an ally. Whether that ally would prove to be their salvation or something else entirely remained to be seen. In the distance, something large and terrible stirred in the depths of Stygian 7's corrupted landscape. The arrival of the struggler had not gone unnoticed by the powers that claimed this world as their own. And in the warp where mortal concepts of time and space held no meaning, entities older than human civilization turned their attention toward the anomaly that had fallen from elsewhere. The brand of sacrifice burned brighter, and for the first time since his arrival, Guts felt the familiar ache that signaled approaching danger. The mark on his neck had never lied to him before. The demons were coming. Not a handful, not a raid, an army. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Guts felt something that might have been anticipation. Because no matter what universe he found himself in, no matter what horrors awaited in the dark, one truth remained constant. He would keep fighting. He would keep killing. He would keep moving forward, because that was all he had ever known. That was all he had left. The cathedral's inner sanctum had once been a place of prayer and contemplation. Now it served as an improvised command center. Its nave filled with tactical displays powered by portable generators, its vaulted ceiling providing cover from the perpetual crimson sky of Stygian 7. Wounded guardsmen lay in neat rows along the side chapels tended by medici who worked with practiced efficiency despite the soul-crushing atmosphere of the demon world. Battle sisters maintained vigilant watch at every entrance, their bolters blessed and ready. In a side chamber that had once housed relics of saints long forgotten, Inquisitor Varus faced a problem that no amount of training had prepared him for. Guts sat on a chunk of fallen masonry, his massive sword leaning against the wall within easy reach. He had accepted water from a nervous guardsman, drank half the canteen in a single pull, and now waited with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime in situations where waiting was preferable to the alternatives. His single eye, the right one lost to some old injury, tracked every movement in the chamber, with the alertness of a predator in uncertain territory. The mechanical left arm rested on his knee, and Varus found himself studying it with professional interest. The construction was masterwork level, yet followed no STC pattern he recognized. The integrated weapon system suggested a culture that valued pragmatism over purity, function over form. It was the kind of technology that would have the Adeptus Mechanicus simultaneously fascinated and horrified. Before we proceed, Varus said, settling into a damaged pew across from Guts, I must ask questions, not to interrogate you, but to understand. This world we stand upon was lost to chaos 3,000 years ago. The Imperium of man sent us to reclaim or destroy it. We have been here for 3 solar days, and in that time we have lost 2/3 of our forces to this planet's corruption. Then you arrive fighting demons, as if it were as natural as breathing. I need to know what you are." Guts was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the flat tone of someone reciting facts that held no emotional weight anymore. "I'm human. Was born human anyway. Grew up in a mercenary company. Learned to fight because that's what you did to survive. Found people I cared about. Lost them." He paused and a memory cut across his face like an old wound reopening. "Lost them to beings that exist between your world and something worse. Been fighting ever since." "The brand on your neck," Varus said carefully. "It reacts to warp presence. I've seen similar marks on those touched by chaos, but yours repels rather than attracts." Guts' hand moved unconsciously to his neck fingers, brushing the bleeding cross. "It's a sacrifice mark. Was marked during a ritual by beings you'd probably call demons. Everyone marked with it gets hunted by every monster and evil spirit that exists. Most people with this brand die within hours. I've had it for years." "How have you survived?" "By killing anything that comes for me." The simplicity of the statement was more chilling than any boast could have been. "At first I ran. Then I fought back. Eventually I realized fighting was all I had left. The brand attracts them, so I use it. I hunt them before they can hurt anyone else." Varus leaned forward, his augur-blessed eyes studying the brand more closely. The wound wept fresh blood constantly, yet Guts showed no signs of blood loss or infection. The injury existed in a state of perpetual renewal, never healing, never worsening. "The warp," Varus said slowly. "The realm of chaos that we fight against operates on similar principles. Spiritual entities that prey upon mortal souls. The 4 ruinous powers who corrupt and destroy. You speak of your world as if it were different, yet what you describe sounds remarkably familiar. Maybe all hells are the same in the end." Tech Priest Fum 7 entered the chamber, his mechadendrites carrying a device that hummed with barely contained energy. "Inquisitor, with your permission, I would like to perform a scan of the entity's brand. The energy signature is unlike anything in Mechanicus records." Guts tensed visibly, his hand moving closer to his sword. "What kind of scan?" "Non-invasive," Varus said, quickly raising a hand to forestall any violence. Tech Priest Fum 7 is merely curious. The Adeptus Mechanicus values knowledge above all else. But he will not touch you without permission." After a moment, Guts nodded curtly. "Do it, but keep your distance." Fum 7 activated his augury scanner, the device projecting a web of green light across Guts' neck and upper chest. The Tech Priest's mechadendrites writhed with agitation as data streamed into his cognitive processors. Fascinating. The brand exists simultaneously in multiple dimensional states. It functions as both wound and ward-attracting entities, while simultaneously providing resistance to corruption. The energy signature suggests a binding rite of extraordinary sophistication, one that chains the bearer to a singular resonance within the Imperium. "In low Gothic," Varus said patiently. "The brand makes him a beacon for demons, yet paradoxically makes him resistant to possession or corruption. It is as if he exists in the margins between reality and the warp, anchored to neither fully." Fum 7's optical lenses focused on Guts, with something approaching reverence. "I theorize that this is why the entity can harm demonic essences with a mundane blade, the sword having been used to kill so many warp entities. entities has absorbed enough spiritual resonance to affect both material and immaterial targets. Guts pulled his shirt back up, ending the examination. Your friend has a lot of words for cursed. The Imperium understands curses, Varus said. We have fought against chaos for 10,000 years. We know what it means to be marked by forces beyond comprehension. He stood, his aged bones protesting slightly. Which brings us to the heart of the matter. You say you hunt demons. We fight the same enemy. An alliance would benefit both of us. I work alone. Then you will die alone on this world. Varus gestured toward the chamber entrance, where the perpetual crimson sky was visible through shattered windows. Stygian 7 is not a single battlefield. It is an entire planet consumed by chaos. There are demon armies beyond counting in the ruins. Warp rifts that open and close without warning. Entities that make the bloodthirster you killed look like a newborn Grox in comparison. You are formidable, Guts. Perhaps the most dangerous warrior I have encountered in 4 decades of service. But even you cannot fight an entire demon world alone. Guts was silent, his single eye fixed on the Inquisitor. Varus pressed his advantage. I am not asking you to serve the Emperor. You have made your stance on that clear. I am asking you to fight alongside us for mutual survival. We provide intelligence support and resources. You provide... He gestured toward the massive sword. What you do best. And when this planet is done, when your demons are dead or banished. Varus hesitated, because this was the difficult part. The honest answer, I don't know. The Imperium does not react well to unexplained anomalies. You would likely face interrogation, possibly imprisonment, perhaps worse. But I give you my word, as an Inquisitor, that I will argue for your release. You have fought against chaos, not for it. That means something. Your word? Guts' tone suggested he had heard such promises before and seen them broken. It is all I can offer. But consider the alternative. We are both trapped on this demon world. The Imperial Navy cannot retrieve us until the warp storms subside, and that could take weeks, perhaps months. Do you truly wish to fight alone for that long? Before Guts could respond, the cathedral shook with a tremendous impact. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling, and somewhere in the distance, an explosion sent tremors through the corrupted earth. Commissar Thane burst into the chamber, his face grim. Inquisitor, we have a situation. The Auspex arrays are detecting massive warp fluctuations to the east, multiple breach points opening simultaneously. It's the demon army. Varus felt his blood chill. They had known it was coming, but he had hoped for more time to prepare. How many? Hundreds of lesser demons confirmed. At least 3 greater demon signatures? And something else. Thane paused, his veteran's composure cracking slightly. Something the cogitators can't identify. The energy readings are off the scale. Guts stood, his hand closing around the hilt of his sword. The massive blade rose as if it weighed nothing, settling into position across his shoulders. How long until they reach this position? 20 minutes, maybe less. Then we'd better get ready. Guts turned to Varus, and for the first time something that might have been respect flickered in his scarred face. I'll fight with you. Not for your Emperor, not for your Imperium, but because demons need to die and you're in the way. After this is done, we talk about what happens next. Agreed. Varus extended his hand, and after a moment Guts gripped it. The Inquisitor's aged hand was engulfed by the calloused, weapon-scarred grip of the swordsman. It was not a gesture of friendship, merely acknowledgement between warriors facing a common enemy. But it was enough. The cathedral transformed into a hive of frantic preparation. Sister Superior Amelie deployed her remaining battle sisters into defensive positions, each sister assigned a firing lane that would maximize bolter effectiveness. Commissar Thane organized the Cadian guardsmen into overlapping fields of fire, their lace guns charged and ready. Tech Priest FUM-7 activated every defensive servitor and automated turret that remained operational, creating a web of interlocking kill zones. And in the center of it all, Guts stood at the forward position, his massive sword planted in the ground before him like a battle standard. He had removed his cloak, revealing armor that was more patchwork than uniform, every piece telling a story of survival. The mechanical arm whirred softly as he flexed its fingers, the integrated weapon systems running final diagnostics. Varus joined him at the barricade, his own weapons prepared. A blessed bolt pistol hung at his hip, and his psychic hood crackled with protective wards. "I should warn you," the Inquisitor said quietly. "What comes for us now will not be like the Bloodthirster. These are organized forces commanded by intelligence and malevolence beyond mortal comprehension. Chaos does not simply destroy. It corrupts. It twists. It makes you doubt everything you believe. I've fought things that made me see people I lost, made me relive the worst moments of my life." Guts checked the ammunition in his cannon arm, the mechanical click of the loading mechanism oddly mundane in the face of approaching apocalypse. "I'm still here, still fighting. That's all that matters." "What drives you?" Varus found himself asking. "What keeps you moving forward when any sane man would have broken long ago?" Guts was silent for so long that Varus thought he wouldn't answer, then barely audible over the rising demon winds, "Spite. Can't let the bastards win, won't give them the satisfaction." Before Varus could respond, the eastern sky split open. Not with the cross-shaped wound that had heralded Guts' arrival, but with a ragged tear that bled darkness instead of light. The warp vomited forth its children in a tide of corruption and madness. Lesser demons swarmed forward first, a living carpet of claws and teeth and burning eyes. Behind them came greater forms, towering monstrosities that defied sane description. And at the rear, coordinating the assault with cold intelligence, strode greater demons. A bloodthirster wreathed in brass and fury led the charge, its axe trailing flames of eternal rage. Behind it, partially obscured by the demon smoke and warp distortions, other massive forms moved with terrible purpose. At least one more greater demon, perhaps two, their exact nature hidden by the corruption that saturated the air. "Throne of Terra," whispered Sister Superior, Amelie making the sign of the Aquila with trembling hands. "It's an army." "It's a target-rich environment," Guts corrected. His sword came off his shoulders, held ready in a two-handed grip despite its immense weight. "I've seen worse odds." "Have you won against worse odds?" Commissar Thane asked, his bolt pistol raised. Guts' scarred face split into something that might have been a smile, though it held no humor. "I'm still alive, aren't I?" The demon horde charged, and the battle for the cathedral ruins began in earnest. Lays gun fire lit up the approaching darkness, each beam a prayer given physical form. Bolter rounds screamed across the killing zone, their mass reactive warheads detonating with sanctified fury. Servitor turrets roared to life, heavy bolters cycling through blessed ammunition at a rate that would drain their reserves in minutes. And at the forefront, Guts walked forward to meet the tide. He moved through the demon ranks like death given purpose, his sword rising and falling with mechanical precision. Lesser demons died by the dozen, their essence scattered by blows that severed both flesh and spirit. When they swarmed him, attempting to drag him down through sheer numbers, his cannon arm spoke with thunder, the blast radius clearing space, even as it sent him sliding backward from the recoil. Varus watched from the barricade, coordinating Imperial fire, while simultaneously tracking Gutz's progress through the horde. The man fought with a brutality that bordered on inhuman, yet there was something profoundly mortal in his struggle. He bled from a dozen minor wounds. He stumbled when a demon's claw caught his leg. He roared with pain when another raked his back with claws dipped in warp taint. But he didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't fall. A bloodletter larger and more formidable than its kin broke through the defensive fire and charged toward the Imperial lines. Commissar Thane raised his bolt pistol, knowing the single shot wouldn't stop a demon of that caliber. But before he could fire, Guts intercepted the creature, his sword catching the bloodletter's brass axe in a shower of sparks. The two combatants locked in contest, demon strength against human will. Guts' mechanical arm came up the integrated cannon, pressing directly against the bloodletter's chest. The explosion at point-blank range sent both combatants flying in opposite directions. The demon dissolved into ichor. Guts crashed into a pile of rubble, lay still for a heartbeat, then forced himself back to his feet. "Medici." Sister Superior Amelie called out. "The warrior is injured." "He's fine," Varus said, watching through his auger lenses as Guts rejoined the battle. His movements slightly slower, but no less determined. He's fought like this before. It's all he knows. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. The demon tide broke against the Imperial defenses like waves against a fortress wall, each surge weakening but never stopping. Ammunition reserves dwindled. Guardsmen fell to demon claws, or worse, to corruption that turned them against their comrades. Battle sisters sang hymns of protection even as their armor cracked under demonic assault. And still Guts fought now, working in coordination with Imperial forces rather than alone. He would draw out the greater demons, forcing them to focus on him, while Lass fire and bolter rounds punished their flanks. He would carve through the lesser demons to create firing lanes for the guardsmen. He would intercept threats that would have overwhelmed defensive positions, his sword serving as both weapon and shield. It was during this desperate defense that Varus understood something fundamental about the man who called himself Guts. This was not a hero fighting for ideals or glory. This was a survivor who had simply refused to die, who had turned survival into an art form refined across countless battlefields. He fought not because he believed in victory, but because surrender was not in his vocabulary. The greater demons finally entered the battle personally, their patience exhausted by the stubborn resistance. The bloodthirster charged first, its brass axe trailing flames of eternal rage. Guts met it head-on, his sword catching the axe blow with a sound like thunder. The impact drove him to one knee, the corrupted earth cracking under his feet. "Support fire," Varus commanded. "Target the bloodthirster. All units concentrated fire." Last beams converged on the demon, each shot barely scratching its brass hide but creating a cumulative effect that made it falter. Bolter rounds exploded against its back. Servitor weapons raked its flanks. The bloodthirster roared in fury, torn between its desire to destroy Guts and the need to respond to threats from multiple angles. Guts used that moment of hesitation. His sword reversed its arc, cutting upward in a strike that found the gap between the demon's leg armor and its torso. Corruption black blood sprayed across the battlefield. The bloodthirster stumbled, its roar turning from fury to pain. The cannon arm fired the explosive round, catching the demon in its chest and staggering it backward. Guts surged forward, his sword a blur of violence, each strike finding weak points in demonic armor that shouldn't have existed. He fought like he knew every weakness, every vulnerability, as if he had studied demons so long that their nature was written in his bones. The bloodthirster fell its massive form crashing to the earth with an impact that sent tremors through the cathedral ruins. Guts stood over its dissolving corpse, breathing hard blood streaming from wounds both old and new. The brand on his neck blazed with crimson light as if fed by proximity to such concentrated warp energies. And in that moment, with a greater demon lying dead at his feet and the Imperial forces rallying behind him, Inquisitor Lucan Varus understood that whatever Guts was, whatever cursed existence he led, he was exactly what the Imperium needed in its eternal war against chaos. A weapon that never broke. A warrior who never surrendered. A man who had looked into the abyss so many times that it had learned his name and learned to fear it. The remaining demons, sensing the death of their champion, began to falter. The other greater demons withdrew their massive forms, retreating into the eastern ruins, along with their surviving forces. The assault had been repelled, though at terrible cost. Half the remaining guardsmen were dead or wounded. 2 battle sisters had fallen to demon claws. The cathedral's defenses were shattered. But they had held. Against impossible odds they had held. Guts walked back toward the Imperial lines, his sword leaving a trail of demon ichor in his wake. He collapsed onto the same chunk of masonry he had sat upon before the battle, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Blood seeped from dozens of wounds, yet he still lived. Still breathed. Still existed in defiance of everything that had tried to end him. Varus approached slowly, Medici following with supplies to tend to the wounded warrior. You fought well. Better than well. You fought like you were born for this. Maybe I was, Guts said, his voice rough with fatigue. Or maybe I just didn't have anything better to do. Rest now. Let the Medici tend your wounds. We have earned a brief respite. Demons don't give respite. No, Varus agreed, looking out at the crimson sky where dark shapes still circled in the distance. But they respect strength. And today we showed them that this position will not fall easily. He paused, then added quietly, Thank you for fighting with us. Guts' single eye fixed on the Inquisitor, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered in those scarred features. Not gratitude, not friendship, but acknowledgement. We're not done yet, Guts said. They'll come again, stronger next time. Then we'll be ready. Together. It was a promise neither man was certain they could keep. But in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there was only war, sometimes promises were all that stood between survival and oblivion. And for now, it would have to be enough. The respite lasted 3 hours. 3 hours in which the wounded were tended, ammunition was redistributed, and the dead were given what rights time permitted. 3 hours in which Guts sat alone on the cathedral's outer wall, cleaning demon ichor from his sword with methodical strokes that spoke of ritual performed countless times before. 3 hours in which Inquisitor Varus coordinated with what remained of Imperial command structure, trying to establish contact with the fleet in orbit through warp storms that made communication nearly impossible. 3 hours that ended when the Auspex arrays screamed warnings of an approaching apocalypse. Inquisitor, Tech Priest Fum7's Vox speaker, carried an edge of something that might have been fear in a more human throat. Massive warp breach detected. Multiple vectors. This is not a raid. This is an invasion. Varus moved to the tactical display, his aged face illuminated by the crimson glow of threat markers that multiplied with each passing second. What he saw made his blood run cold. How many? Initial scans indicate at least 2,000 cultist infantry. Scores of possessed marines, demon engines, greater demon signatures. FUM-7's mechadendrites trembled as more data flooded his cognitive processors. Inquisitor. The cogitators estimate enemy strength at regiment strength formation. We are facing a chaos army. Commissar Thane appeared at Varus's shoulder, his weathered face grim. Our effective strength is 47 guardsmen, 3 battle sisters, and 1 tech priest. We cannot hold this position against those numbers. Retreat is not an option, Sister Superior Amelie said, checking the ammunition in her bolter. The nearest fallback position is 40 kilometers across demon-corrupted terrain. We would be hunted down before covering half that distance. Mas, then we die here, Thane said simply. We die while taking as many of the Emperor's enemies with us as we can. It is all we can ask. Guts rose from his position on the wall, the Dragon Slayer sliding into position across his shoulders with familiar weight. He walked to the tactical display, studying the approaching red markers with his single eye. When he spoke, his voice carried a certainty that bordered on madness. You're not dying here. None of you. Varus turned to face him. Guts, even your abilities have limits. Against 2,000, I've fought worse odds. Guts' scarred face held no bravado, no false confidence. Just the flat statement of someone reciting fact. Give me their location, their approach vectors. Then pull your people back to secondary defensive positions. You cannot face an army alone. I've done it before. Guts checked his cannon arm, the mechanical components cycling with smooth precision. You keep saying demons are your enemy. That chaos is what you fight. Well, I've been fighting the same war longer than you've been alive. This is what I do. The Berserker armor, FUM-7 said suddenly, his optical lenses focusing on Guts with new intensity. During my earlier scans, I detected components integrated into your existing armor that appear to serve a biological override function. Augmentation systems designed to suppress pain receptors and amplify physical capabilities beyond safe parameters. Guts' hand moved unconsciously to touch a section of his armor near his heart. It's a last resort. Once it activates, I'm not always in control. Then don't use it, Varus said firmly. I will not send you to your death even to save my own people. We stand together, or Inquisitor. Guts' voice cut through the argument with quiet intensity. You said you've been fighting chaos for 40 years. You know what happens if they overrun this position. They won't just kill your people. They'll corrupt them, turn them, make them worse than dead. His single eye burned with something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite determination. I won't let that happen. Not again. The last 2 words carried such weight that Varus found himself stepping back. In that moment, he saw past the scarred warrior standing before him, saw glimpses of the horrors that had forged this man into the weapon he had become. Whatever Guts had witnessed, whatever he had lost, it had burned away everything but the absolute refusal to surrender. Very well, Varus said quietly. Commissar Thane, pull back all forces to the cathedral's inner sanctum. Establish a final defensive line. If Guts falls, we make our stand there. He turned back to Guts. May whatever gods you believe in watch over you. Gods never watched over me. Guts walked toward the outer perimeter, his stride steady despite the wounds he still carried from the previous battle. But they seem to enjoy making my life hell, so I'll return the favor. He stopped at the forward barricade, looking out across the corrupted landscape toward the approaching chaos forces. The demon winds had intensified, carrying the sounds of marching feet and mechanical screams. In the distance, warp rifts pulsed like infected wounds, vomiting forth more corruption with each throb. The brand of sacrifice began to bleed more heavily, crimson running down his neck to stain his collar. The mark was responding to the massive concentration of warp energy approaching burning, with an intensity that would have driven lesser men to madness. But Guts had lived with this pain for so long that it had become just another constant in a life defined by suffering. He closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. In his mind, he could feel it stirring. The beast of darkness, that manifestation of his own rage and hatred, always lurking at the edges of his consciousness. It sensed the coming battle, sensed the opportunity for violence, and it hungered. Not yet. You don't get to feed until I say. The first wave of chaos cultists emerged from the ruins 3 kilometers distant. They moved like a flood of corruption, made flesh thousands of human figures twisted by exposure to the warp. Some had grown extra limbs. Others bore mutations that defied description. They carried crude weapons, industrial tools repurposed for slaughter, and they chanted as they came, blasphemous hymns to gods that fed on suffering. Behind them came the possessed Marines, once proud warriors of the legions Astartes, now reduced to demonic vessels. Their armor had fused with twisted flesh, ceramite flowing like wax around mutated bodies. They moved with the terrible coordination of a military force that had fought for 10,000 years, their discipline unbroken even by possession. And towering over them all, demon engines stalked forward on legs of brass and bone. Defilers that had once been Imperial war machines, now corrupted beyond recognition. Their cannons wept blood. Their joints screamed with the voices of tormented souls. They advanced with ponderous inevitability, each step cracking the earth beneath their weight. Guts opened his eyes, studying the approaching horde with the clinical assessment of someone who had faced similar odds before. 2,000 targets. Maybe more. It didn't matter. They were all just obstacles between him and the next dawn. He reached within himself to the place where the Berserker armor waited. The armor had been forged in an age before his own, crafted by hands that understood the price of power. It would let him fight beyond human limits, let him ignore injuries that would kill ordinary men, let him become the avatar of violence he needed to be. But it would also cost him. Each time he used it, the beast grew stronger. Each time he let it take control, it became harder to pull back. One day, he knew he might activate the armor and never return to himself. Today was not that day. Guts triggered the activation sequence. The transformation was not dramatic. There were no flashes of light, no theatrical displays of power. The Berserker armor simply awakened. Components hidden within his existing armor extended, locked into place, connected with his nervous system in ways that overrode his body's natural safety mechanisms. The helmet formed around his head, a beast's visage of iron, and hatred its eye sockets blazing with feral light. And the pain stopped. Not because the wounds had healed, but because the armor suppressed his ability to feel them. The torn muscles in his back no longer screamed warnings. The fractured ribs no longer restricted his breathing. The brand that had been burning with warp taint became just another irrelevant sensation filtered away by the armor's brutal efficiency. What remained was capability without limitation, strength without restraint, violence without conscience. Guts raised the Dragon Slayer, and something in the way he held it had changed. The sword no longer seemed massive or unwieldy. It had become an extension of his will, a tool perfectly suited to its purpose. When he swung it experimentally, the blade moved faster than physics should have permitted, cutting the air with a sound like tearing silk. The beast of darkness stirred in his mind, its presence stronger with the armor active. It showed him visions of slaughter of the cultists, torn apart by the dozen of demon blood painting the corrupted earth. It whispered promises of power, of satisfaction, of finally letting loose the rage he had suppressed for so long. Not yet. When I need you. Not before. He began walking forward toward the approaching army. His pace was steady, unhurried, the mechanical precision of the Berserker armor translating thought into action without the delay of conscious decision. Behind him from the cathedral walls, the remaining Imperial forces watched in stunned silence. He's walking toward them. Commissar Thane said, his voice hollow with disbelief. Throne of Terra, he's walking directly into an army. Recording all data, Tech Priest Fum7 muttered, his mechadendrites working frantically to capture what was about to occur. This behavior is unprecedented, tactically unsound. Yet, what Mago's Sister Superior Amelie asked, her hand tightening on her bolter. Yet he has survived this long by doing the impossible. Perhaps the impossible is simply what he does. The Chaos cultists saw him coming. Their chants faltered as they registered the lone figure walking toward their army. Some laughed, thinking him mad or suicidal. Others, those who had survived long enough to develop instincts, felt the first stirrings of unease. The possessed Marines raised their weapons, bolt pistols, tracking the approaching target. At this range, they could reduce him to paste with concentrated fire. But their commander, a Chaos Lord, whose name had been struck from Imperial records, raised a hand to halt the volley. "Let him come," the Chaos Lord growled, his voice distorted by the demon inhabiting his flesh. "Let us see what manner of fool walks willingly to his death." Guts covered the first kilometer at a walk. The cultists jeered and howled, emboldened by his apparent suicidal approach. They raised their weapons, preparing to swarm over him the moment he came within range. Then he accelerated. The Berserker armor released the full capabilities of his enhanced physiology, translating potential into kinetic reality. Guts went from walking to sprinting in a single step, covering ground with inhuman speed. The Dragon Slayer came off his shoulders, held low and ready, and when he hit the leading edge of the Chaos forces, the slaughter began. The first dozen cultists died before they understood what had happened. The massive blade carved through them in a horizontal arc that continued through metal, bone, and flesh, without slowing. Corrupted blood sprayed in a crimson arc, and Guts was already moving the sword, flowing into the next strike with seamless efficiency. He fought without thought, without hesitation, the Berserker armor stripping away hesitation and letting his body react faster than thought. Cultists lunged at him with improvised weapons, and he cut them down mid-swing. Possessed Marines fired bolt rounds, and he dodged or deflected them with movements that defied human reflexes. The demon engines turned their cannons toward him, and he was already elsewhere, leaving only corpses in his wake. The Dragon Slayer sang its song of ending, each strike severing not just flesh, but the connection between demon and host. Possessed Marines fell and did not rise, their inhabiting entities cast back into the warp, with wounds that would take centuries to heal. Lesser demons that materialized to join the assault dissolved under his blade. Their essence scattered like smoke in a hurricane. Blood covered him, layer upon layer, until his black armor gleamed crimson in the demon light of Stygian Seven's perpetual twilight. His wounds reopened flesh, tearing under stress that would have crippled ordinary men, but the Berserker armor kept him moving. Metal spikes extended from the armor's interior, piercing his flesh to hold broken bones in place, forcing his body to function despite catastrophic damage. and still he fought. The Chaos forces, confronted with a phenomenon they could not understand, began to falter. These were veterans of the Long War warriors who had faced the Imperium's finest and emerged victorious. But they had never encountered anything like this. A single man who moved through their ranks like incarnate death, who killed with such efficiency that their numbers became meaningless. The Chaos Lord finally moved to intercept his demon-enhanced strength, propelling him forward on legs that cracked the earth with each step. He was massive, 3 meters of corrupted muscle and brass armor, wielding a power axe that crackled with warp energies. When he swung at Guts, the blow had enough force to split a land raider in half. Guts caught it on the Dragon Slayer. The impact sent shockwaves rippling outward, killing cultists caught in the pressure wave. The ground beneath Guts' feet cratered, but the Berserker armor held him steady, metal spikes digging deep into the earth for purchase. For a moment, the two combatants stood locked in contest demon strength against armor-enhanced human will. Then Guts' mechanical arm came up the integrated cannon, pressing against the Chaos Lord's midsection. The explosion at point-blank range was catastrophic. The Chaos Lord's armor cracked ceramite and brass fragmenting under the blast. The demon inhabiting his flesh screamed as it was forcibly separated from its host, torn from the material realm by sheer destructive force. Guts didn't wait for the corpse to fall. He was already moving the Dragon Slayer, carving through the next cluster of enemies, the cannon arm firing again and again until its ammunition ran dry. Then he used the mechanical limb as a bludgeon, crushing skulls and breaking bones with impacts that deformed power armor. In the cathedral, Inquisitor Varus watched through his auger lenses, his face a mask of controlled horror. How is he still standing? He should be dead 3 times over. The armor, Fum7 said, his Vox speaker trembling. It's keeping him functional, despite injuries that would kill even a space marine. But Inquisitor, look at his movements. They're becoming less controlled, more feral. It was true. As the battle continued, as the Berserker armor forced Guts' body past its limits, the Beast of Darkness grew stronger. It whispered in his mind, showing him visions of endless slaughter, promising relief from the pain if he would just let go. Just surrender control and become the monster they all feared. Kill them all, the Beast whispered. Every last one. Make them suffer as you have suffered. Show them what true despair means. Guts' grip on his consciousness began to slip. The line between himself and the Beast blurred. His strikes became wilder, less precise, trading efficiency for raw brutality. He grabbed a cultist by the throat, crushed the windpipe with his mechanical hand, then used the corpse as a bludgeon against its fellows. He bit into a possessed Marine's neck when his weapons were momentarily out of position, his teeth tearing through corrupted flesh with animal savagery. The army of chaos, faced with this berserker nightmare, broke. They had come expecting to overwhelm the Imperial position through sheer numbers. Instead, they found themselves being decimated by a single warrior who refused to die, who killed with such relentless brutality that even veterans of 10,000 years of warfare felt fear creep into their corrupted hearts. The cultists fled first, their fanaticism insufficient to overcome the primal terror of watching their comrades torn apart. The possessed Marines retreated more slowly, maintaining discipline even in withdrawal, but their demon-enhanced senses screamed warnings that this was a fight they could not win. The demon engine's soulless machines of war continued to advance. They had no fear to overcome, no morale to break. They existed only to destroy, and they would pursue that function until destroyed themselves. Guts met their advance head-on. The Berserker armor calculated trajectories, predicted weapon fire, moved his body through spaces between incoming shells and energy beams. When he reached the first defiler, he didn't slow. The Dragon Slayer, already impossibly sharp and imbued with the essence of countless slain demons, carved through the demon engine's leg joints, with strikes that severed both metal and the binding rituals that held it together. The defiler toppled its cannons, still firing wildly as it crashed to the earth. Guts leaped onto its fallen form, the sword plunging down through the demon engine's core. Where the blade pierced the corruption, unraveled, warp energies dissipating as the demon bound within was forcibly banished. He moved to the next demon engine and the next killing war machines that should have required entire squads of space marines to bring down. The Dragon Slayer had become more than just a weapon. It was a severing tool cutting the connection between the material and immaterial casting demons back into the warp, with wounds that would take ages to heal. And then finally, it was over. Guts stood alone on a field of corpses, surrounded by the broken bodies of cultists and possessed marines and demon engines. Blood dripped from every surface of his armor. The Dragon Slayer was notched and scarred from impacts that should have shattered lesser blades. His body, invisible beneath the Berserker armor, was a mass of injuries held together only by the armor's brutal intervention. The beast of darkness raged in his mind, demanding more violence, more killing, more blood. It showed him the Imperial forces in the cathedral, suggested that they too deserved death for the sin of being weak, for needing protection, for existing in a universe that had shown him nothing but suffering. No Guts thought his consciousness, fighting for control. Not them. Never them. He forced his will against the beast, pushed it back down into the depths where it lurked. The struggle lasted seconds that felt like hours, his body trembling with the effort of reasserting control. Finally, grudgingly, the beast retreated. Not defeated, never defeated, but willing to wait for the next opportunity. Guts deactivated the Berserker armor. The pain hit immediately, a tidal wave of agony that would have dropped an ordinary man into unconsciousness. Every wound the armor had suppressed made itself known all at once. Bones that had been broken and forced back into position screamed their damage. Muscles torn beyond recovery spasmed uselessly. The brand burned with intensity that suggested his proximity to so much warp energy had nearly driven him past the point of no return. He fell to his knees, the Dragon Slayer planted in the corrupted earth as the only thing keeping him upright. Blood leaked from dozens of wounds, staining the ground beneath him. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhalation a reminder of ribs that had cracked and pierced internal tissue. But he was alive. Still alive. Still conscious. Still himself. In the cathedral, Inquisitor Varus stood frozen, unable to process what he had just witnessed. An entire chaos invasion force broken by a single warrior. 2,000 enemies reduced to corpses. The impossible made manifest. Medici, he finally managed to say. Get every available Medici to his position immediately. If that man dies after what he just did, I will consider it a personal failure before the Emperor. Sister Superior Amelie made the sign of the Aquila with shaking hands. What is he, Inquisitor? Varus watched through his auger lenses as Guts remained kneeling among the dead, a lone figure painted in blood and defiance. He is what we all should be, the Inquisitor said quietly. Someone who refuses to surrender no matter the cost. Someone who looks at impossible odds and chooses to fight anyway. He paused, then added, He is a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can become something that even demons learn to fear. The Medici rushed from the cathedral toward Guts's position, but he waved them back with his mechanical arm. Slowly, agonizingly, he forced himself back to his feet. The Dragon Slayer rose with him, and he began the long walk back to the Imperial lines. Each step was an act of will, each breath a defiance of the injuries that should have killed him. But he walked anyway because that was what he did. He survived. He endured. He continued forward. And watching from the warp, where mortal concepts of time and space held no meaning, entities older than human civilization marked the anomaly that had fallen into their domain. The brand of sacrifice should have made him easy prey, a beacon for every demon that hungered. Instead, it had become a warning. This one fought back. This one had teeth. This one was dangerous. The Medici worked through the night, their hands steady despite exhaustion and the ever-present awareness that they operated on a man who should not be alive. Guts lay on a makeshift surgical table in the cathedral's sacristy, his armor removed piece by piece to reveal the full extent of his injuries. What they found defied medical logic, even by the brutal standards of the 41st millennium. Fractured ribs that had been forced back into alignment by mechanical intervention. Muscles torn so completely that the fibers had separated at a cellular level. Internal bleeding that should have drowned his organs in their own fluids. And through it all, a network of old scars that spoke of decades spent walking the knife edge between life and death. How is he still breathing? One of the Medici whispered, her augmetic hands trembling as she applied counterseptic to a wound that had already begun closing through sheer force of will. Because he refuses to die. Sister Superior Amelie answered from the doorway, her bolter still clutched in her hands. She had not left her post since Guts had returned from the battlefield, maintaining vigil as if her presence alone could ward off whatever darkness followed in his wake. I have seen space marines with less will to survive. Inquisitor Varus observed from the shadows, his aged face illuminated by flickering candles that cast dancing patterns across the sacristy's walls. The brand of sacrifice on Guts' neck continued to bleed, the crimson flow never stopping, never slowing. It wept like a wound that existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously bleeding in ways that defied the Medici's attempts to staunch it. The mark responds to warp presence. Tech Priest Fum7 noted his mechadendrites extending sensory probes toward Guts without quite touching him. Current readings suggest ambient warp saturation has spiked significantly since the battle. Something is gathering strength in the eastern ruins. The greater demons that withdrew, Varus said quietly. They're regrouping, planning their next assault. Inquisitor Fum7's Vox speaker carried an unusual note of concern. I detect unusual psychic emanations focused on this location. Not a direct attack, but probing. As if something is attempting to establish contact with the entity. Varus's hand moved to his psychic hood, the blessed circuits activating with a low hum. Through his augmented senses, he felt it. A presence vast and terrible, ancient beyond mortal comprehension, that moved through the warp with the inevitability of a predator stalking wounded prey. It circled the cathedral like a shark in dark waters, testing their defenses, searching for gaps in their protection. A lord of change. Varus breathed recognition, sending ice through his veins. One of Tzeentch's greater demons, a master of manipulation and deception. Can it breach our wards? Not physically, not yet. But these demons don't need to enter a place to corrupt it. They work through dreams, through visions, through the cracks in a person's mind. Varus looked at Guts, lying unconscious and vulnerable on the surgical table. And he has just given it an opening through sheer exhaustion. In the space between waking and sleep, in the gray realm where consciousness dissolves into dreams. Guts found himself standing in a place he recognized with bone-deep dread. The eclipse. The sky above was wrong, filled with swirling patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ground beneath his feet was not earth, but the broken bodies of comrades, friends, people he had failed to save. And ahead of him, silhouetted against that impossible sky, stood the figures that haunted his every waking moment. Griffith, Casca, the band of the Hawk as they had been before the sacrifice, before everything had been torn away. No, Guts said, his voice raw. This isn't real. You're not real. Does it matter? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, sliding through the air like oil on water. Real, unreal, memory, vision, dream. Such distinctions are meaningless in the realm of thought. The scene rippled, reality fragmenting like a shattered mirror. The eclipse dissolved, replaced by something else. The cathedral, but not as it was. Clean, pristine, filled with Imperial citizens going about their daily prayers, safe and content. And standing among them, wearing armor unmarked by battle, was Guts. Not the scarred survivor he had become, but the man he might have been if things had gone differently. Younger, whole, at peace. This could be your reality. The voice continued, taking form now. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and terrible, its form constantly shifting between shapes that the mind struggled to comprehend. Feathers that burned with impossible colors, eyes that multiplied and divided in geometric patterns, wings that spread across dimensions. The past cannot be changed, but the future remains unwritten. I can give you what was taken: peace, purpose, freedom from the curse that marks you. Guts gripped his sword, though in this place, the Dragon Slayer felt distant, less real than it should be. I don't make deals with demons. I am no demon, the being said, and its voice carried overtones of wounded pride. I am Kairos, Fate Weaver, Vizier of Tzench, Oracle of 10,000 possible futures. I am opportunity given, form change made manifest. And I offer you a gift that no other power in this universe can provide. The vision shifted again. Guts saw himself fighting alongside the Imperial forces, not as a temporary ally, but as something more. A champion, a hero. The people looked at him, not with fear, but with gratitude. Varus stood beside him, not as a wary overseer, but as a true comrade. The brand of sacrifice on his neck had faded to a pale scar, its curse finally lifted. You have fought alone for so long. Kairos said, its multiple voices weaving together in harmonies that suggested sincerity. Against enemies you could not defeat, for people you could not save. But here in this reality, you could be more than a survivor. You could be a guardian, a protector, the hero you were meant to be before fate was stolen from you. Despite himself, Guts felt something in his chest tighten. The vision had to be a lie, but it showed him things he had not allowed himself to want in years. Not glory or power, but simple acknowledgement. The chance to fight for something instead of just against everything. What's the price? He asked, his voice flat. Merely acceptance? Kairos gestured with appendages that shifted between hands and talons and things that defied description. The brand you bear chains you to forces beyond this universe. I can sever that connection, free you from the curse. In exchange, you would accept a different mark, the blessing of the changer of ways. Your strength would remain, but directed toward purpose rather than vengeance. You want me to serve chaos. I want you to serve yourself. The demon's voice took on an edge of genuine passion. Chaos is not evil, despite what the Imperium preaches. It is potential, Freedom. The power to reshape reality according to will, rather than submitting to the tyranny of stagnation. You have spent your life fighting against fate, against the forces that tried to chain you. Why would you submit to a different chain now? The vision showed him more. World saved from demon invasion, not through faith in a corpse god, but through his own strength channeled through Tsench's blessings. The beast of darkness, no longer a curse, but a tool its rage focused and controlled. A future where the brand attracted not monsters, but allies, where his curse became his greatest strength. Guts closed his eyes, shutting out the visions. In the darkness, behind his eyelid, he found clarity. "I've heard this song before," he said quietly. "Different words, different promises, but the same melody. You think I don't know what serving a god costs? I watched it happen. Watched people I cared about twisted into something they weren't. Watched them lose everything that made them human in exchange for power. But they chose unwisely," Kairos insisted. "They sought power for selfish ends. You would wield it for noble purpose. There's no such thing as noble purpose when you're serving monsters." Guts opened his eye and the vision rippled under his steady gaze. "You talk about freedom and potential, but all I hear is the same thing every manipulative bastard says when they want to control someone. Trust me. Give me power over you. I know what's best." The false cathedral began to crack, reality bleeding through the illusion. Kairos's form grew larger, more terrible, abandoning any pretense of benevolence. "You reject the gifts of the great conspirator. You who bear the mark of sacrifice already, you belong to powers beyond mortal comprehension, whether you acknowledge them or not. Then I'll keep fighting them." Goot's grip on the Dragon Slayer solidified the sword, becoming real again in his hand. "That's what I do. I fight. I survive. And I sure as hell don't bow to anything that thinks it owns me." The Lord of Change's laughter echoed through the fragmenting dream space, carrying overtones of genuine amusement mixed with frustrated rage. "Then you condemn yourself to eternal struggle. The brand will never stop bleeding. The demons will never stop hunting. You will fight and suffer and die alone, unmourned, forgotten, all because you were too proud to accept help when it was offered. Better that than becoming someone else's weapon." The vision shattered completely. But before it did, Kairos's voice whispered one final promise. "We will speak again, Black Swordsman, and next time you may be more desperate." Guts woke with a gasp, his hand reaching for his sword before his conscious mind fully registered his surroundings. The sacristy, the cathedral, the medici stumbling backward in alarm as he lurched upright, wounds tearing open from the sudden movement. "Stay down," one of them ordered. But Guts was already on his feet, the Dragon Slayer in his hand despite the protests of his broken body. Inquisitor Varus stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Guts, you're safe. You were dreaming. Whatever you saw, it was here." Guts interrupted, his single eye scanning the shadows for threats that had already departed. "A Lord of Change. Kairos something. It tried to get into my head." Varus's expression turned grave. "What did it offer you?" "Freedom from the brand. Power. A place to belong." Guts' laugh was bitter. The usual lies. As if I haven't heard them all before. "And you refused?" "Of course I refused." Guts finally lowered his sword, though his grip remained tight on its hilt. "I've seen what happens to people who make deals with things like that. Seen what they become. I'd rather die as myself than live as someone else's puppet." Sister Superior Amelie made the sign of the Aquila, her expression one of dawning respect. You were offered corruption and rejected it. Even when your body was broken and your defenses low, you maintained your will. That is remarkable. It's survival, Guts corrected. I learned a long time ago that anything offering easy answers is usually trying to kill you. Just takes longer than an honest fight. Fum7's mechadendrites twitched with agitation. Inquisitor, if a Lord of Change has taken personal interest in the entity, the threat level has escalated beyond current projections. These greater demons do not offer their attention lightly. Which means Guts has become a piece on the Great Games board, Varus said grimly. Tzeentch sees potential in him. Potential that the Chaos God wants to corrupt or destroy. Let them see potential. Guts sat back down on the surgical table, ignoring the Medici's protests as they resumed their work. I've been a target for worse things than chaos. At least here I can see them coming. But even as he spoke, he felt it. The beast of darkness stirring in the depths of his consciousness where it always lurked. It had been quiet during the vision, unnaturally so, and now it whispered with renewed hunger. They're afraid of you. The beast set its voice, the darkest part of Guts' own thoughts. The demon offered you power because it recognizes what you already are. A killer. A weapon. Something that doesn't belong anywhere except on the battlefield. Not now. Guts thought back. When will you admit what you really are? Not a hero, not a protector, just a survivor who's too stubborn to die and too dangerous to be around anyone else. The beast showed him visions of his own making. The Berserker armor's activation. The moment when control had slipped. The instant when he had looked at the Imperial forces and felt the urge to keep killing, to let the violence continue, until nothing remained. That's what you want, the beast insisted. Not peace, not purpose. Just the next fight, the next enemy, the next excuse to let me out. Guts. Varus's voice cut through the internal dialogue. Are you well? Guts realized he had been staring at nothing, his hand white-knuckled on his sword's grip. He forced himself to relax, to push the beast back down where it belonged. Fine. Just tired. The Inquisitor studied him with eyes that had interrogated heretics and questioned demons. He knew a lie when he heard one. But he also recognized that some battles could only be fought alone. The Medici need another hour to finish their work, Varus said carefully. Then you should rest. Properly rest, not the exhausted unconsciousness you've been operating on. The demons will return, and when they do, we'll need you at your full strength. I'm never at full strength. Gut said a statement of fact rather than complaint. Haven't been for years. You learn to fight anyway. Is that what you tell yourself? The question came from Sister Superior Amelie, her tone not accusatory, but genuinely curious. That you're fighting despite your limitations, rather than because of them. Guts met her gaze, and for a moment something passed between them. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a shared burden. She served an emperor who was slowly dying. He fought with a curse that would never heal. Both of them carried weights that would eventually crush them, and both kept moving anyway. I tell myself to get up every morning, he said simply. Everything after that is just momentum. The Medici finished their work in silence, knowing better than to interrupt whatever moment had formed between the three warriors. When they finally departed, leaving Guts bandaged and as stable as he would ever be, Varus moved to the sacristy's window. Dawn was breaking over Stygian 7, though the perpetual crimson sky made it difficult to tell. The demon winds had quieted, but it was the stillness before a storm rather than peace. "The Lord of Change will try again," Varus said without turning. "These daemons are patient. They probe for weaknesses, test defenses, and when they find an opening, they strike with precision that makes physical combat look crude by comparison. Then I'll refuse again. Will you?" Varus finally turned his expression unreadable. "How many times can you say no, Guts? How many offers will you reject before exhaustion and pain and the sheer weight of your curse makes one of them look appealing? I have seen the strongest wills broken by chaos. Not through force, but through erosion. One small compromise at a time, until the person realizes they've already fallen. Is this your way of telling me you don't trust me?" "No." Varus moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "This is my way of telling you that I understand. I know what it's like to face impossible choices. To stand at the edge and look into the abyss and have it whisper promises. I've been an inquisitor for 40 years, Guts. 40 years of making decisions where there was no right answer, only degrees of wrong. And every time the voices told me there was an easier way, a darker path that would solve everything. But you didn't take it." "No, because I remembered something my mentor told me before he died. The moment you think the ends justify the means, chaos has already won. We fight not just to survive, but to remain ourselves while doing so. The instant we lose that, we become no different than the enemies we fight." Guts was quiet for a long moment, processing words that resonated with truths he had learned through blood and suffering. "Your mentor sounds like he knew what he was talking about. He died fighting a demon that offered him power to save a dying world. He chose to let the world fall rather than accept corruption." Varus's voice carried old pain. "Billions died because of his choice, and he went to his grave believing he had done the right thing. Did he? I don't know." The admission seemed to cost Varus something. "I've never known. But I've tried to honor his example anyway, because the alternative is to believe that all this suffering means nothing." Before Guts could respond, alarms began shrieking throughout the cathedral. Tech Priest Fum7's voice crackled over the Vox network mechanical panic, evident in his normally flat tone. "Inquisitor massive warp breach detected multiple coordinates. This is not a raid. This is a coordinated assault." Varus and Guts reached the command center simultaneously, where tactical displays showed a nightmare unfolding across Stygian 7. Warp rifts were opening not just in the eastern ruins, but throughout the entire region. Dozens of them, hundreds. A cascade of dimensional tears that vomited demonkind into the material realm in numbers that defied comprehension. "Throne of Terra," Commissar Thane breathed. "It's a full-scale demonic incursion. Emperor, save us. This is crusade level." "The greater demons we repelled weren't retreating," Varus said, understanding flooding through him with cold certainty. "They were regrouping, calling for reinforcements. They're locking the whole planet fully into the warp. They're finishing the corruption." Guts studied the tactical display with the eye of someone who had survived countless impossible situations. The demon forces were converging on the cathedral from every direction, a tide of corruption that would overwhelm any conventional defense within hours. "You can't hold this position," he said bluntly. "We have nowhere to retreat to," Thane replied. "The entire continent is compromised. And even if we could reach the spaceport, the warp storms would prevent any evacuation. Then we make them regret coming here. Guts' hand moved to his sword, the familiar weight grounding him against the madness unfolding around them. We turn this cathedral into a killing ground. Make them pay for every meter of ground. Against those numbers, Amelie shook her head. Even with your strength, there are limits to what one man can accomplish. Then it's a good thing I'm not planning to fight alone. Guts turned to Varys, and the Inquisitor saw something in that scarred face that made him understand why Chaos feared this man. Not hope exactly, not optimism or faith, just absolute unshakable refusal to surrender. You wanted to know if you could trust me, if I'd break under pressure. Here's your answer. I'm going to stand on these walls and kill everything that tries to cross them. If you and your people want to stand with me, we might have a chance. Varys felt something shift in his chest. This was not the moment his mentor had faced, where the only choices were damnation or death. This was different. This was a man who had every reason to give up, who carried burdens that would have broken most people choosing to fight anyway. Not for faith, not for duty, simply because it was what he did. Then we stand, Varys said, making the sign of the Aquila. May the Emperor watch over us all. Save the prayers. Guts replied, already moving toward the armory where his equipment waited. Just need to remember what I've always known. Doesn't matter how strong the enemy is. Doesn't matter how many of them there are. All that matters is whether you're willing to keep swinging until one of you stops. He paused at the doorway, looking back at the Imperial forces who would stand with him against the coming storm. And I never stop. In the eastern ruins, Kairos Fate Weaver observed the cathedral's defenses through eyes that saw across multiple timelines simultaneously. In most of the futures, it could still perceive the Imperial position, fell quickly overwhelmed by the sheer weight of demonic numbers. But in a handful of timelines, rare and flickering like candles in a storm, something different occurred. The Lord of Change's countless eyes narrowed with something approaching concern. In those rare futures, the Black Swordsman did something unprecedented. Something that changed not just the battle's outcome, but the nature of reality itself on Stygian 7. Interesting, Kairos murmured to itself. Perhaps rejection was the correct choice after all. This one does not need corruption. He is already perfect, as he is a catalyst for change that even the great conspirator did not foresee. The demon smiled, if such an expression could be applied to its ever-shifting features. Let the Black Crusade begin. Let us see which fate the struggler chooses when hope itself becomes impossible. And in the depths of Guts' consciousness, the beast of darkness laughed. The demons came with the falling darkness, though on Stygian 7 darkness never truly fell. The perpetual crimson twilight simply deepened to the color of old blood. And in that deepening, the warp rifts multiplied like infected wounds across the planet's corrupted flesh. From the cathedral's walls, Guts watched them come. Thousands, tens of thousands, a tide of corruption that stretched to the horizon and beyond, flowing toward the Imperial position with the inexorable certainty of a rising flood. Lesser demons capered and howled in the vanguard. Possessed Marines advanced in disciplined formations behind them. And towering over all, coordinating the assault with cold intelligence, greater demons moved like gods among insects. Throne preserve us, Commissar Thane whispered, his bolt pistol suddenly feeling inadequate in his hand. There must be 20,000 of them. More, Tech Priest Fum 7 said, his mechadendrites trembling with data overload. Cogitator estimates suggest upward of 30,000 individual hostiles. Greater demon count 7 confirmed possibility of more obscured by warp interference. Inquisitor Varus stood beside Guts, his psychic hood crackling with protective wards as the approaching chaos forces pressed against his mental defenses. "This is the end," he said quietly, not with despair but with the simple acknowledgement of fact. "Even if we kill 100 each, we will be overwhelmed within the hour. Then we make that hour count." Guts' hand rested on the Dragon Slayer's hilt, the familiar weight grounding him against the enormity of what approached. The Berserker armor waited beneath his regular equipment, its presence a constant whisper at the edge of his consciousness. He could feel the beast stirring hungry for the violence to come. Finally, the beast whispered, "Finally, you understand. There's no point in holding back anymore. No reason to pretend you're anything but what you are. Let me out. Let me show them what true slaughter looks like." Not yet. Guts thought back, though the certainty in that refusal felt thinner than it had before. Sister Superior Amelie approached her bolter blessed with every prayer the ecclesiarchy knew. The remaining 2 battle sisters flanked her, their armor bearing the scars of battles that should have killed them. "We stand with you, Black Swordsman," she said formally. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Around them, the surviving Cadian guardsmen took up positions behind makeshift barricades. 47 soldiers remained from the original company, their laser guns charged and aimed at the approaching horde. They were exhausted, wounded, running on stims and desperation. But they were Imperial Guard, and they would hold their line until death claimed them. Because that was what they did. "All units." Commissar Thane's voice crackled across the Vox network. "This is our final stand. The Emperor watches. Make him proud." The demons reached weapons range, and the world became fire and blood. Laser gun beams lanced into the approaching horde, each shot a prayer made manifest. Bolter rounds exploded among the lesser demons, their mass-reactive warheads turning corrupted flesh to ichor. The Battle Sisters sang hymns of protection as they fired their voices steady, despite the nightmare rushing toward them. Guts stood at the forward position, the Dragon Slayer in hand, and let the first wave come to him. When they reached his position, he began to kill. The sword moved with mechanical precision, each strike severing demon flesh and the spiritual connection that bound these entities to reality. He fought without the Berserker armor's enhancement, relying on decades of experience and the cold efficiency that came from surviving impossible odds. Lesser demons died by the dozen, their essence scattered before they could close to melee range. But there were too many. For every demon he killed, 10 more pressed forward. The Imperial fire couldn't stem the tide, merely slow it. Within minutes, the outer barricades were breached. Within 10 guardsmen were dying at their posts, dragged down by clawed hands and fanged maws. A possessed Marine broke through the defensive line, its bolter spitting death as it charged toward Sister Amelie's position. Guts intercepted it, the Dragon Slayer catching the traitor's power axe mid-swing. The impact sent shockwaves through both combatants, but Guts held firm. His cannon arm came up, pressed against the possessed Marine's chest, and fired. The explosion sent him sliding backward, but the Chaos Warrior fell, its torso cratered by the point-blank shot. The demon inhabiting it screamed as it was cast back into the warp-bearing wounds that would take centuries to heal. "They're flanking!" Thane shouted. "East wall is collapsing." Guts ran to the new breach, arriving just as a pack of bloodletters poured through the gap. He cut them down methodically, the Dragon Slayer singing its song of ending. But even he couldn't be everywhere at once. A guardsman fell screaming to his right. Another was torn apart by demon claws to his left. The cathedral was becoming a charnel house, and they had barely held for 20 minutes. "Let me help," the beast whispered. You're going to die if you keep fighting this carefully. Let go. Let me out. Not yet. When they've all died, when you're the last one standing covered in their blood, knowing you could have saved them. Guts faltered, and in that moment of internal struggle, a greater demon entered the battle. It was a lord of change, though not Kairos himself. One of Tzench's favored servants, a master of sorcery and manipulation. It descended from the crimson sky on wings of impossible colors, and where its gaze fell, reality itself began to warp. Guardsmen screamed as their bodies transformed into living sculptures of madness. Battle sisters found their bolters melting into wax, even as they fired. Fall back, Varus commanded, unleashing psychic lightning at the greater demon. The energy splashed against the creature's shields, barely scorching its feathered form. Everyone inside now. The surviving Imperial forces retreated into the cathedral's inner sanctum, sealing the heavy doors behind them. It bought them minutes at most. Through the stained glass windows, they could see demons swarming over the outer walls, their victory all but assured. Guts stood in the center of the nave, breathing hard, the dragon slayer dripping with demon ichor. Around him, the survivors took up final positions. 47 guardsmen had become 32. 3 battle sisters had become 2. Tech priest Fum7's mechadendrites sparked from battle damage. Commissar Thaim Sarthane's uniform was soaked with blood from wounds he refused to acknowledge. And outside, the demons gathered for the killing stroke. "I'm sorry," Varus said quietly, moving to stand beside Guts. "I brought you into this, asked you to stand with us, and now—" "Don't," Guts interrupted. "I made my choice, been making it every day since the eclipse. Some battles you can't win, but that doesn't mean you stop fighting." The cathedral doors began to buckle under demonic assault. Wood that had stood for millennia cracked and splintered. Warp energy seeped through the gaps, corrupting the sacred stone with its touch. "Last chance," the beast said. "Activate the armor. Let me take control. I can save them. Save you. All you have to do is let go." Guts closed his eye, feeling the weight of the dragon slayer in his hand, the brand bleeding on his neck, the exhaustion that had accumulated across countless battlefields. He thought about Casca, about the band of the Hawk, about everyone he had lost because he hadn't been strong enough, fast enough, willing enough to become the monster they needed. The doors exploded inward, and the demon horde poured through. Guts activated the Berserker armor. The transformation was instantaneous. Pain ceased. Limitations dissolved. The Dragon Slayer became lighter than air, faster than thought. When he moved, it was with speed that defied human capability, each strike finding vulnerable points that shouldn't have existed. He tore through the demon tide like death given purpose, the armor overriding his body's protests, forcing broken bones back into alignment with metal spikes, suppressing nerve signals that would have paralyzed him. He fought beyond human endurance, beyond sanity, teetering on the edge where Guts ended and the beast began. "Yes," the beast roared in triumph. "This is what you are. This is what you've always been. Stop pretending and embrace it." The line between man and monster blurred. Guts felt himself slipping, felt the beast's consciousness rising like a dark tide. He was killing efficiently, brutally, but he was also starting to lose track of targets. A guardsman stumbled into his peripheral vision, and for just an instant, the Dragon Slayer began to swing toward the friendly, before conscious thought reasserted control. Too close. He was losing himself. Through the blood haze of battle, Guts saw it. The Lord of Change descending into the cathedral proper, its staff raised to unleash sorcery that would end this battle permanently. It spoke words that caused reality to fracture, weaving corruption that would transform the survivors into something worse than dead. And behind it, at the shattered doors, Kairos, Fate Weaver, itself entered. The Oracle of 10,000 Futures come to witness the end of the anomaly that had defied its predictions. Guts met the Lord of Change. Head-on, the Dragon Slayer carving through its protective wards through sheer force of will, amplified by the Berserker armor. The greater demon shrieked as the blade bit into its essence, severing the connection between its material form and warp-born consciousness. But engaging one greater demon left him vulnerable to the other. Kairos' staff struck the ground, and the world inverted. Suddenly, Guts was no longer in the cathedral, but standing in the eclipse again, surrounded by the band of the Hawk as they were torn apart by apostles. Griffith stood before him, newly reborn as Femto, and spoke words that cut deeper than any blade. You were always meant to lose. Every victory was just delayed failure. Everyone you've ever cared about dies because you weren't strong enough, fast enough, willing to pay the price that true power demands. The vision was perfect, drawing on Guts' memories and trauma to create a prison of guilt and despair. The Berserker armor couldn't protect against this kind of attack. This was psychological warfare refined over millennia, targeting the cracks in his mind with surgical precision. "Let me take over the beast," said its voice, now calm, almost gentle. "You fought long enough. Rest. Let me handle this. I'm not afraid of visions. I'm not haunted by the past. Give up control, and I'll get us through this." And Guts, exhausted beyond measure, feeling his consciousness dissolving under Kairos' assault, almost did. Then he heard Vara's voice cutting through the illusion. Not the Inquisitor's physical voice, but the memory of what he had said earlier. "The moment you think the ends justify the means, chaos has already won." The eclipse wasn't real. Griffith wasn't here. This was just another manipulation, another attempt to break him by showing him the one moment when he had truly been helpless. But he wasn't helpless anymore. He had survived. He had continued. He had chosen to keep fighting even when fighting seemed pointless. That choice was what defined him, not strength, not the brand, not even the beast. The choice to refuse surrender. Guts' eyes snapped open and the illusion shattered. He was back in the cathedral, the Dragon Slayer still in his hand, Kairos' staff descending toward his skull. The Berserker armor moved his body faster than thought, bringing the massive blade up to intercept. When the Dragon Slayer met Kairos' staff, something unprecedented occurred. The sword, tempered in the blood of thousands of demons, imbued with the absolute refusal of the man who wielded it, did more than parry. It severed. Not just the staff, though. That ancient artifact of Tzeentch split in half with a crack like thunder. The blade continued its arc, carving through Kairos Fate Weaver's twin heads, through its constantly shifting form, through the very concept of its existence in this moment. The Lord of Change, Oracle of 10,000 Futures being that had manipulated the fates of entire civilizations, died. Its essence exploded outward in a pulse of unlight that sent every demon in the cathedral reeling. But more than that, the warp itself seemed to recoil from the impossibility of what had occurred. Kairos' essence tried to reform, to reassemble according to patterns written into the fabric of the Imperium itself. But the Dragon Slayer's cut had severed something fundamental. The warp didn't know how to put it back together. The demon's death was absolute in a way that demon deaths should never be. The connection to the warp wavered, and for just an instant, the invasion faltered. Guts stood over the dissolving form of the greater demon. The Dragon Slayer still raised the Berserker armor's helmet, showing eyes that burned with something beyond human. he had killed before, had destroyed greater demons, slaughtered armies, carved his path through every horror the universe threw at him. But killing Kairos Fateweaver sent a message that echoed through the warp itself. The anomaly was not just dangerous. It was anathema. A being that operated on principles outside the great game, that refused corruption not through purity, but through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. Tzeentch itself, in the depths of its crystal labyrinth, felt the death of its oracle and recoiled. Not in fear exactly, but in recognition. This was not a piece to be moved on the board. This was something that threatened the board itself. The remaining demons, feeling their patron's uncertainty, began to withdraw. Not in organized retreat, but in confusion, their coordination broken by the death of their commander. The warp rifts started closing the massive invasion, collapsing as suddenly as it had begun. In the cathedral, the survivors couldn't quite believe what they were witnessing. They're leaving. Sister Amelie lowered her bolter, her voice carrying disbelief. We're alive. Guts deactivated the Berserker armor, and the pain came crashing back all at once. Every bone the armor had broken to keep him fighting, every muscle it had torn, every nerve it had forced past its limits. He fell to his knees, the Dragon Slayer clattering to the cathedral floor beside him. Varus rushed to his side, Medici following. Don't move. Emperor's name, don't move. We'll get you stabilized. One guy. Guts managed to say through bloodied lips. Told you, all that matters is whether you keep swinging. You killed a Lord of Change, Commissar Thane said, his voice filled with awe. You killed Kairos Fateweaver itself. I've read the texts. That demon has existed since before the Imperium. And you just killed it. Will someone please explain? Tech Priest Fum7 said his mechadendrites working frantically to catalog what his sensors had recorded. How an unaugmented human just accomplished what typically requires entire chapters of Grey Knights. Guts coughed, tasting blood. Not unaugmented, just differently broken. He looked up at Varus, his single eye unfocused but still alert. The rifts. Closing. Yes. Without Kairos coordinating the invasion, the lesser demons are losing coherence. The greater demons are withdrawing rather than risk facing whatever you've become. Varus studied him with something approaching reverence. You did it. You turned the tide. We did it. Guts gestured weakly at the surviving guardsmen, the battle sisters, everyone who had stood on the walls and fought impossible odds. Wouldn't have lasted long enough for one kill to matter if they hadn't held. For 3 days, Guts drifted between consciousness and delirium. The Medici worked around the clock, repairing damage that should have killed him a dozen times over. The Berserker armor had kept him functional during the battle, but the price was steep. Fractured spine, punctured lung, internal bleeding that should have been fatal. But he lived, because that was what he did. On the 4th day, he woke to find Inquisitor Varus sitting beside his bed, reading from a data slate. The older man looked up as Guts stirred a tired smile crossing his weathered face. Welcome back. We were beginning to worry you'd decided to sleep forever. Guts tried to sit up, failed settled for turning his head. How long? 3 standard days. The warp storms have begun to subside. Fleet Command estimates will have evacuation capability within a week. Varus set aside the data slate. The survivors are calling you the Black Saint. Sister Amelie has been arguing with Commissar Thane about whether to petition the ecclesiarchy for formal canonization. Tell them not to bother. Guts' voice was rough, his throat raw. Saints die for causes. I just keep breathing out of spite. Perhaps that's what saints are. Varus leaned forward, his expression growing serious. We need to discuss what happens next. When we evacuate the Inquisition, we'll want to question you extensively. Your abilities, your origins, the brand, all of it represents unknowns that make the Ordo Malleus nervous. You saying I should run? I'm saying you should choose. Varus pulled out a small device, setting it on the table beside Guts's bed. This is a personal teleport Homer. Mechanicus technology extremely rare. It's keyed to a transport ship leaving Stygian 7 in 6 hours, heading for the Eastern Fringe. No questions asked, no records kept. Why are you giving me this? Because you've earned it. Varus stood moving to the window where the crimson sky was finally beginning to clear. You fought alongside us when you had no reason to. You killed a demon that has plagued the Imperium for millennia. And you did it all while maintaining your own identity, refusing every offer of corruption. He turned back his aged eyes, meeting Goot's single one. The Imperium will want to chain you, to study you, to turn you into a weapon they can control. I can't stop that. But I can give you a chance to leave before it happens. Guts was silent for a long moment, his mind working through options and consequences. Finally, he spoke. If I leave, what happens to you? Won't they blame you for letting me go? Probably. But I'm an old man who's already made his peace with whatever judgment awaits. Your freedom matters more than my career. Varus smiled faintly. Besides plausible deniability, you stole it while I wasn't looking. Damn thief, that black swordsman. Despite everything, Guts found himself almost smiling. You're a decent man, Varus, for an inquisitor. Careful. Compliments like that might make me question my life choices. The inquisitor moved toward the door, then paused. Whatever you decide, Guts, know this, you gave us hope. Not because you were strong, but because you showed us that even in the darkest times, someone can stand and refuse to break. The guardsmen who survived will tell that story for the rest of their lives. That matters. After Varus left, Guts lay alone with his thoughts. Through the window, he could see the cathedral's courtyard where the surviving Imperial forces were regrouping. Sister Amelie was leading a prayer service for the fallen. Commissar Thane was organizing the guardsmen into work details. Life continuing despite the horror they had endured. He could stay. Let the Inquisition interrogate him. Study him. Try to understand what he was. Maybe they could help with the brand find a way to lift the curse. Maybe he could become something resembling normal. Or he could leave. Keep moving, keep fighting, never staying in one place long enough for chains to form. It was what he had been doing for years anyway. What was one more galaxy where he didn't belong? What does it matter, the beast whispered, quieter now after its feeding during the battle. Stay or go, you'll still be alone. Still be cursed. Still be exactly what you've always been, a weapon without a purpose. Maybe Guts thought back. But it's my choice. That's what matters. 6 hours later, a small cargo transport lifted off from Stygian 7's spaceport. Its manifest listed routine supplies and no passengers. Inquisitor Varus, conducting his official investigation of the site, noted the departure with appropriate documentation and moved on to other matters. In the transport's hold, sitting among crates of ammunition and medical supplies, Guts felt the rumble of engines as they broke atmosphere. Through a small viewport, he watched Stygian 7 shrink behind them. A demon world whose corruption had stalled, for now held at bay by the blood price paid in that cathedral. He didn't know where the transport was heading, didn't know what he would do when he got there. But the Dragon Slayer rested across his lap, the brand still bled on his neck, and he was alive. That would have to be enough, because it always had been. Years later, in the libraries of the Ordo Melius, a report would be filed under highest encryption. It detailed the events on Stygian 7, the death of Kairos Fate Weaver, and the disappearance of an entity known only as the Black Swordsman. The report concluded with a single recommendation: if encountered again, avoid engagement if possible. The anomaly designated Guts operates outside standard threat classifications. Not corrupted by chaos, not faithful to the Emperor, simply refuses. Recommend observation only, unless absolutely necessary. In the margins in handwriting, identified as belonging to Inquisitor Lucin Varus, deceased honored service. Someone had added a single note. Some weapons are meant to stay free. Let this one go. And across the dark spaces between stars, where the Imperium's light faded and monsters lurked in the void, a man with one eye and a sword too large for any normal human walked alone into the next dawn. Still fighting, still refusing to break, still surviving, because that was all he knew how to do, and in the end, it was enough.